And we're live streaming from the footsteps of New York City. We are Music Matters with Jason Tramm, and thank you for joining us for our unique podcast community, where we explore the issues, challenges, and triumphs of the performing arts world as seen through the eyes of distinguished colleagues. Thank you so much for helping our community grow. We just hit 1,435 subscribers, and we're delighted that you are here today to watch. These conversations with colleagues have been such an amazing time for me to learn from people doing amazing things. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on upcoming guests and topics. Please like and share our videos as it helps us to grow. You can also see us in New York, or hear us in New York City on radio, on WMCA radio on Saturdays from 11:30 to noon Eastern Standard Time. Or if you can go on the WMCA website, you can see us anywhere in the world at that time as well. So thank you for joining us. And we have a wonderful guest today, a violinist doing incredible work. This is Priyanka Venkatesh. And this is not the first Venkatesh to be on Music Matters. We had her brother Vijay, and we're delighted that she can join us today. And she is finishing up her, originally she was a pre-med student, and then her path changed back to music. And finally, she's finishing her doctorate in violin performance at UCLA. And as a blend of it, she's studying and she's incorporating a blend of various cultures, Indian and Western classical music, into a new hybrid. She did study in India on a Fulbright Scholarship, and I look forward to hearing her today. So thank you so much for joining us, and welcome, Priyanka.
Thank you so much, Jason. That was a great introduction. Actually, I'll just add something. So
please do.
I got a Fulbright Scholarship. I haven't gone yet. So I'm kind of waiting in anticipation to go. It's been suspended because of COVID, obviously. So I'm in this kind of like a limbo period, but I'm very, very excited to go. And like you said, I've studied Indian classical music, also Western classical music, but this is a chance for me to really to study Indian classical music even more in depth and help myself work even more intelligently in this field that you were speaking about, which integrates Indian and Western classical music, and to create this new hybrid, this new synthesis of music in an intelligent way.
I've loved connecting with my Indian colleagues, and I've gotten to work with some really fantastic Indian artists, and it just amazes me how talented they are and how different the traditions are. I had to ask a lot of questions and do a lot of research so I could speak. Some of the pieces we did were Western string quartet mixed with other players who were not reading music, so we had to figure out ways to communicate with each other, and it was such an interesting dialogue, and in the end, so fascinating, and we all learned so much about each other. What drew you towards combining these two different styles?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've just felt like your art needs to, well, for me at least, I can only speak for myself. Art needs to reflect who I am, and what I am is this blend of Indian and Western cultures. And so I started my musical life listening to Carnatic. Sort of Carnatic being South Indian classical, that's the South Indian classical tradition. So these hymns, and I didn't play any music, but I listened to it, and that was kind of like that set the musical foundation of my life. But then living in the U.S., my mom, she found me a piano teacher, and so I started piano, and then later on, I in fourth grade they bring the whole violin set up to school, and then they encourage you to learn
petting
string.
Zoo, we say.
Yeah. The petting zoo. That's a good way of putting it. And then I really loved the sound of the violin. I actually thought, maybe I'd like the flute, but I couldn't get a sound out of the flute. So I thought maybe the violin is better for me. I think it was a better decision.
Now, were your parents musicians? You have two professional musicians in the family. Were your parents professional musicians?
No, my mom did a little bit of singing. They just really love music, and my dad helped pay the bills. He also really loves music.
We have to have those supporters to support us.
Oh yeah, no, I'm laughing, but it's not a laughing matter. I mean, they like to support in any way is something that needs to be acknowledged.
Absolutely. So your love of music, and did you know early on that you wanted to be a professional artist?
I know I've always loved music and dance. I just love the performing arts. I think I didn't think early on what I wanted to be. I just felt like I love this. Like you were saying, I was doing pre-med in college. My dad's a doctor. It's kind of an Indian thing to go into the sciences. I love science actually, but then in college, I started to feel like, where do my creative energies lie? You can be creative in any field, in science and anything pretty much. You can put your creative energies out there. And I was just feeling like in the sciences, I just wasn't so creative. I was doing a lot of memorizing, and I didn't have that sort of scientific creative flexibility, but I had it in in the arts and music. So really unexpectedly, before my grandfather passed, he was telling me the point of life, and getting into really deep subjects, and he was telling me the point of life is to be creative and put your creative energies out there. And so it just, like a switch went off, and I said, what am I doing? I need to go into music. That's where I'm creative. And that pretty much that day, I decided I would switch my path. And now that I look back on it, I think, oh, that was really brave. But for me then, it just felt easy and right, and it just felt right. I think you know what I mean. It just feels right.
I
Sometimes you don't
do.
know how you're gonna do it. You don't know the steps, but it just, like, some energy feels right, and you feel that enthusiasm about it. And
We
I
all have
would,
those forks in the road. It's like, and when you choose the one you know you should be on, it does. It just kind of opens up for you. The great pianist Jeffrey Beagle was on the show, and he called it your yellow brick road. Kind of opens up before you, and all you have to do is
yeah,
follow.
your golden path. Kind of, I mean, it's like sometimes you can't really rationalize it out. Sometimes like, if you rationalize it, it feels, oh, I shouldn't do this. But sometimes you got to turn your rational brain off and say, no, this energy, it just feels right. I feel enthusiastic. I got to go down that path.
Well, you and Berlioz were in the same boat. He was also a medical. He was thinking about medical school, and his family was saying medical school, and he's like composition, and he's like music criticism, and then he went the music route. Thankfully,
I guess, but hopefully I wouldn't characterize myself as crazy like Berlioz was.
he was out there.
I can have my moments, I guess, but maybe not like him.
He certainly was one of the most interesting people. And I love to tell, I teach undergraduates, and one of my favorite things to teach, besides the orchestra and choruses I work with, I love doing this music and civilization, which is a survey course. And
Oh,
a lot of
wow.
my students have never been to a live classical performance. And that's one of the course requirements. And I say how interesting it is that people get so stuck in their way of thinking. And before Berlioz, they would say the timpani player can play two timpani, boom, 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 right? And he's Berlioz like, I want to write for more. He's like, bum, bum, boom. And people are like, whoa.
What?
Sometimes it takes that outside the box thinker to make things change.
Yeah. He also was kind of instrumental in bringing the clarinet, I think, into the orchestra. Am I right? You might.
Not the clarinet, but every other instrument you can imagine. When I did the Berlioz Requiem, there was four brass ensembles in four corners of the hall to symbolize the graves being opened and the four corners of the world opening up, and 500 singers singing at once. It was some of
Yeah,
the most
definitely.
incredible orchestral effects. He was one of the innovator of some of those wild effects.
Yeah. He needed grandeur. He couldn't survive without
The
it.
grandest, certainly. So, so you grew up with Carnatic music in your ears, and you've trained yourself as a classical musician. Did you start playing violin, Indian violin?
Yeah, so I started with piano, then I went to Western violin in fourth grade. And then I started to feel like this isn't, like I said, it's not completely me, just playing Western music. I love Western classical music, but it didn't quite feel right. Again, this feeling, it's kind of like a theme in my life. Feelings, not really rational thinking, but just it just didn't feel right. So so Carnatic music has this tradition of violin as well. When the British were in India, Carnatic musicians, they adapted the violin into the Carnatic tradition. So it's a very
So it only goes
big,
back to the British period. Interesting. I did not know that.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, there are all sorts of theories, but I mean, I think by and large we can say that when the British were in India, Indian musicians saw these like quartets. They saw like they saw a lot of Irish music, like Celtic music being played. And so they said, wow, this instrument is super versatile. We should adapt it into the Carnatic tradition. And it works beautifully because Carnatic music has so much sliding and subtle ornamentations, and you can do anything you want on the violin,
All
right?
those juicy microtones, right? Those
Yeah,
chords.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, so it's a very big tradition. So my dad, I asked my dad, like, I want to learn Carnatic violin. So he helped me find a Carnatic teacher in Southern California. So I studied Carnatic music for many years. And then in college, when I started to focus, so I was doing also science, I was doing a lot of things. I was doing Bharatanatyam, which is South Indian classical dance as well. So I
I've
love
had
music and
multiple
dance.
students I trained when I was a high school teacher who were serious dancers, and they would bring in their orchestras from India, and I got to see several of them. And wow, the when they did their I'll call it their senior recital, but I'm sure that's not what it's called. But
The
their high point,
Arangetram, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
incredible, just incredible.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. So yeah, I was doing a lot of this syncretic. So I was in the Indian field, Indian space. I was in the Western space. But then in college, I needed to focus. So if with my degrees, my music degrees, I needed to focus on Western music. So I kind of put Carnatic music a little bit on the side for a bit. But then during my doctorate, I started to feel I've been doing all this syncretic stuff. So it's kind of like you can tell, oh, this is the Western space, this is the Indian space. Is there a way I can make it more synthesized so that you can kind of no longer tell what is Western, what is Indian? What it's just this, it's a third thing almost. It's almost a new genre of music. Because like I'd like to think of myself as an integrated person, an integrated being of one culture, not multicultural, not bicultural, but this intercultural person that you can't really tell like the Indian side of the Western side is very beautifully integrated. So I want to do this with my music as well. Is this a possible thing? So that's what I've been exploring in my doctoral work, and also what I want to explore in further in life. I don't want it to be this syncretic music where you can tell, oh, there's the Indian space and that's the Western, where it just becomes this beautiful synthesis. I think it can be a great movement almost that is not just I could be a part of, that many people could be a part of, because many people identify as Indian, like Indian American, but can there be this intercultural space, or it's just this one culture that you identify as?
You're going to be at the vanguard of this, and there's so much. That's truly American, is to combine and to mix and to. I think that's such a wonderful thing about when culture is it can be so interesting, and we all have such interesting voices to share, and yours is going in a very interesting direction. You research. What is your dissertation on? I know today is a very important day for you. I'm so glad you made time for us to join us on Music Matters. I know you're got your oral exams for your doctorate. That's you look very relaxed.
Don't remind me.
I prepared myself for a couple weeks before. There's not much you can do at that point. I know.
I figured that, I'd rather just kind of relax here. Otherwise, I just maybe be thinking about it. Like here, I'm just talking. This is a preparation almost.
I'm not going to ask you what year the Berlioz was born, his dates, and.
Oh, I think I was already a bit confused about what he had done. Right? I just know he's very crazy. He wrote. I love his music.
Yeah, it's
fantastic. Like.
never fails. Well, so what's your dissertation on? I was reading about it and sounded fascinating. What's your actual dissertation title?
So again, it's about interculturality between Indian and Western classical music. So there's been a lot of research on like Western pop music integrating Indian classical music, but there hasn't been this research on Indian classical music and Western classical music coming together, because very little of that has actually happened. There are kind of these barriers. In India, when musicians take Western classical music and combine it with Indian idioms, that's no longer considered a classical music. It's more of a popular style. And then when Western musicians have taken Indian classical music, it's kind of this exoticist sort of
it's very easy to fall into that camp in classical music. Yes.
Yeah, that this exoticist practice. So I speak about the exoticist era, and not to say that these pieces are not beautiful, like Scheherazade or Sinfonia Español, or Korsakov also wrote Sadko, an opera. I'm sure you've heard. So they have. He has a piece called "The Song of India."
I
and
used to sing that as an undergraduate. Yes, it's
oh
gorgeous.
yeah,
It uses
it is
the
a beautiful piece.
Da, 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 da.
Yeah, the chromaticism to kind of imitate the slidings in Indian music. It's very beautiful, but it just again, it's a kind of imitation. It's just kind of add a little to orally destabilize
not authentic,
you,
but beautiful, certainly.
Yeah, so you're orally destabilized, but not enough that you're uncomfortable. That it's a completely different world. So, but you can still tell that you're in the Western sound space. But what I'm trying to do is, so I speak about this exoticist era, and then I speak about how now, since about the mid 20th century or so, a little bit later maybe, and especially now in modern times, we're moving away from this exoticist period now towards interculturality, where it's not about just kind of like picking superficial aspects of a foreign idiom and saying, oh, that sounds nice, let me renew my Western composition with this new stuff.
A veneer.
yeah, like a pastiche kind of sort of thing. It's not that. It's more of really trying to study the foreign idiom in a profound way, in an authentic, genuine way. And if you feel called to then perhaps combine with the Western and Indian classical idioms in composition and in performance. So yeah, my dissertation speaks about this kind of trajectory from exoticism to interculturality. And then there are also many different levels of interculturality. So I was speaking about there's syncretism, where you can kind of still tell this is one idiom, that's the other idiom, and they're kind of combined in a interesting way, but yeah, they're still separate. But the ultimate is this like synthesis, where they're just kind of this integrated, seamless whole, where you can't really tell what is Indian, what is Western. And one of the last piece that I played on the recital I just gave, for me embodies this synthesis, where it's of both cultures, but it's kind of its own thing. It's not Indian or Western.
That's exciting. And what I love about Western classical music, for example, is that it can keep growing with new voices. And we're seeing so many different voices joining, and people from different cultures can add to the canon, and the canon just grows. And I think there's so much room, and it's so rich for everyone when we can hear new voices and see how things can change.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the kind of compositional aspect of Western classical music, the idea of the work. So you can, as a composer, as a performer, you can integrate different idioms in a thoughtful way, and create new works of art. And I think this can be something that we can work with in order to bring different cultures together. It's very idealistic, I know, but I think music. Let's be idealistic. Let's use music as a way to bring
These days, we
together.
need to connect with people and figure out ways to speak across lines. And music is by far is the natural way. It's such a natural way to connect people.
Yeah, because when you think about it, I mean, hundreds of years ago, what connected people? It was religion. Like people would go to the church, the temple, what have you, and come together and feel that communion. But now that's kind of been eroded a little bit. And what do we have now? We have sports, and we also have music. And I would say music concerts, even more so, are more powerful in bringing people together. And so we as composers, as performers, are kind of like the priests of this space where people can come together in communion. And we have a lot of power, and we should be conscious of this and use this to our best abilities.
And I'm sure that your father will be happy, because even though you didn't go into medicine proper, you're still going to heal people through your art. And that's a beautiful thing.
I tell him that. He's actually very supportive of me. I'm really
Shout out to
thankful
the
for
dads.
that.
I have 4 kids. I have a 21-year-old, twin 18-year-olds, and a 16-year-old, so I know all about these things.
Did you encourage them to go into music or
Well,
or
my oldest produces the show with me. He's a television production person, but he has a minor in jazz guitar. My
oh
twin
no,
girls, one was a really good flute player, but she's going to go into nursing. The other
nice.
one studied violin and piano and organ and is going into veterinary studies. And my youngest son wants to be a professional drummer, and he's 16 and he's going to Berkeley this summer to do the jazz intensive.
Wow,
So
that's the
he wants
perfect
to
place
be
to be.
he wants to go into music. So we'll see.
Berkeley's a perfect place to be for that. Yeah. I kind of wish I'd like, I mean, I love the whole, like, what Berkeley's about. It's just very different people, different cultures, different idioms coming together,
He
trying to
can't wait to
create something
meet the
new.
different artists around him and to the people from all over the world. It'll be wonderful. Just like I imagine California is there's so many, just like New York. There's so many. You can find someone from any ethnic group in New York City just walking down the street. You can hear different types of music, and I just love that being in the major cities. You have so much exposure to different cultures. Each has something so special to say, and I just love when I do opera because I meet artists of every culture. It's so interesting. Every cast is from 6 different countries, and I'm always learning from my colleagues.
Yeah, that's the beauty of music, and yeah, it's a language, and it's a very flexible language because you can just combine these different styles together into something that can bring people together. It's really exciting to be a part of.
So let's talk about the differences between Western classical and Indian classical. And you were telling me before about the terms and how far back terms go. I could be wrong on this. Please correct me if I am. Now, Indian classical music goes back a good 1,000 years before Western classical music. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of scholarship done on that. I mean, Western classical music, it depends on what you define as classical music.
Also,
Is
Gregorian chant, yeah, from
Gregorian chant, is that classical music? So that's like
the
800s.
proto-classical, yeah, 800s to for the fall of the Holy Roman Empire to. That's what I usually start, but that's just me.
Okay, so yeah, I
Pope
mean,
Gregory.
that's like 400, 500. Yeah, so I would say I mean, it depends on what you define as Indian classical music. Does it start in the Natya Shastra, which is a treatise written in the BCE era? It's a question of like semantics, and it's quite old. I don't want to say it's older than Western classical music. I don't like to create this kinds of kind of dichotomies, but it's a very old tradition, and it's been evolving for a very long time. And so what you have is in the South, you have this Carnatic tradition that we were speaking about, South Indian classical music. And then in the North, you have Hindustani classical music. And I think what most Westerners know as Indian classical music is the Hindustani classical music tradition with the sitar, Ravi Shankar, the tabla. That's all North Indian classical music. So the date is not really sure, but about 1,000 years ago or so, they say that there was one classical music and then it kind of branched off into a southern style and a northern style, which have different instruments, different kind of ornamentation styles, different canons. North Indian classical music is based largely on improvisation. So, South Indian classical has like more of a work-centered sort of style. So it's kind of like a large generalization, but South Indian classical music is kind of equated to Western classical music, and the North Indian classical music is kind of equated to jazz. Like
With the oral tradition, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, but there is also a lot of improvisation in the Southern tradition as well. So it's not really a great analogy, but it's just kind of like a way to like a first stab at getting to know these different traditions. It's helpful to kind of, the North Indian music is a little bit more like jazz, and South Indian classical music is a little bit more like Western classical music. But yeah, that's
you study Carnatic music. Did you study both North and South traditions?
So I just started studying North Indian classical music for my dissertation, but yeah, I hadn't studied much of it before. I really enjoy it. It just has for me, it's a little bit more, there's a bit of like a sensual aspect to it. Carnatic music for me is very learned. but and also it's a little bit more religious based, more like spiritual based, but Hindustani music, for me at least, yeah, it has more of a sensuality to it, which I like.
Beautiful. And what are the challenges and the differences? Give us some observations of learning both styles. What's it like trained in Western music, learning Indian music back and forth? What are the challenges? It's like, I know when you speak two languages, people dream in one language. It gets really interesting. It must be fascinating to go back and forth.
Yeah. Sometimes, yeah, I equate it to speaking different languages. So if you start speaking one language more, you just get more comfortable with that. But then you got to go back and kind of hone your skills in the other. So it's the same in with the Indian and Western. You just got to kind of keep both up. And then, now I'm working in this space where it's kind of just I'm trying to integrate them. So I'm kind of using both traditions at the same time. So I like to think I'm practicing both, and I don't need to practice one anymore or the other.
You're making your own way. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and then just some basic differences between Western classical and Indian classical music. So Western classical, so it's based on like the idea of the scale, like that's kind of the foundation. Whereas Indian classical music, the it's one of the hallmarks of it is the raga, which you may have heard. So raga is a sort of scale, but that's only kind of half of the story. It's a scale, and raga can also be described in many different ways. But one of the ways it can be described is through its tonal material. So it's a tone collection. It's like a scale, but it also has characteristic phrases. It has certain slidings. It has certain cadential features that give it a personality almost. So it's kind of on a spectrum between a scale and a full-blown melody. It's in between. So it has certain, like it has characteristic phrases and it has a person, but it's not a full-blown melody. That it's not a scale. It's in between.
Right off the bat, that's so different in its thought process and its philosophy, and I'm sure that's the starting point. So, what are some of the other challenges in translating these two styles and bringing them together? What are some of the things that it's taken you? Must have taken you a lot of time to come up with these ideas. And have you worked with composers who are writing for you, or are you composing yourself?
Yeah, so for my dissertation, I've worked with a composer, Shirish Korde. He works at the University of the Holy Cross. And yeah, so he wrote this piece that was inspired by the rag Lalit. And I can play.
Oh, please do.
Absolutely. Some of it. So let me just look at mine. So you can see. Yeah. So Lalit is a tone collection that. So the tone collection of Lalit is. So if I were to just play those notes, that's not Lalit. It's just those are just notes. Like if I were to play C major, that's C major, and that's the end of the story.
Not Vivaldi, right? But it's
yeah, that's the end of the story. Whereas if I just were to play these tones, that's not Lalit. It's just half the story. So what are some of the characteristics of Lalit? What give it its personality? So Lalit is described, or it has this sort of, they call it a rasa, which is like an emotional affect or even a spiritual affect of devotion. So what gives Lalit this affect? There are two tonal centers in this tone collection. So there's E, and then there's A. Because you have the D sharp, and then you have the F natural. So they hover around E, right? So that it creates this sort of magnetic center around E. And then there's also A. So there's G sharp and there's B flat here too. So what happens is there's this kind of, this hovering around these tonal centers, which create this sort of longing feeling. So it kind of sounds like. So this kind of, it has a personality around it. If I were to play, that's not Lalit. It's just a bunch of notes.
And
right?
the playing style was, very different. Not everything had an omnipresent vibrato. You changed the sound, the color of your sound, the kind of such a different interpretation of like violin that you could hear. It was quite different. I've heard so many violins, but your characterization is completely different.
Yeah. So in Indian classical music, there's less of this vibrato, so to speak. I mean, there are ornamentations, but yeah, it's just a different. There is shaking of the hand, but it's a little bit more. It's kind of wider. Western style vibrato is just different from the Indian style. I think because just slidings are so integral to West Indian music, if you were to add Western style vibrato on top of that, I think it would just get too much.
It's like putting ketchup on a steak. Not
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, I can also play a little bit of this piece that now it integrates both Indian and Western style. So I'll do Western style vibrato.
Please do.
But so it's also in this Rag Lalit. So I'll stand up maybe. I think it'll be easier for me to play.
Now, would this piece be written down or improvised with a lead sheet type of thing? How did you learn this? Was it written down for you?
So the composer Shirish Korde, he wrote this piece. Mm-hmm. So he studied both Indian and Western classical music in depth, and it's just kind of this organic synthesis. So he wrote it down, but I mean, he tried to write rhythms and things, but a lot of it is just you got to bring the kind of ad libitum feel to it. So
between the lines, I love that.
Yeah. So I'll play a little bit of it. Let me just. Can you still hear me if I don't move the mic?
Crystal clear.
Okay. So.
Brava. Brava. Such stunning music making. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Now, when was that written? How long did it take to learn? And what were some of the challenges in presenting a piece that was new and bringing it to life? When was the genesis of the piece, and how did it come to be?
So it was written in 2017, actually, and so it was written before I knew Sharish, and I was looking for a piece to kind of to speak about in my dissertation, and through my research, I discovered his music, and I asked him if I could write about it, if I could play this piece in my recital and kind of unpack it for performers and write about how Western performers could play this in a more authentic manner. And from there, then our friendship has grown, and now we're working on new pieces together that we could play or compose and get performed. It's kind of like it was the beginning of a great sort of friendship.
Nothing like those artistic collaborations which bring new pieces to life. And it's something so exciting about the act of creation, about performer and creator. Is he a violinist?
No, he not a violinist. He plays piano, mostly a composer. Mm-hmm. He I think he just has an intuitive feel for the violin, because it's idiomatic, but it's also different. It's like it fits in the fingers really well.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It was so beautiful. What are some things that you find similarities between the two musical styles? What are some things that are the same? Because we all have our differences. There's musical differences, certainly, in the style, of course, in so many different ways. But what are some of the things that unite us all?
Like in terms of musical styles?
Sure.
Or just how... Wow, it's a big question. What are some like performance styles? Well, I think like the cliche is music is a universal language, right? I mean, it is. There are obviously different idioms and different ways you can express, but I think music is it can be so malleable. You can much more than language even that you can kind of mold it to how what you feel inside, and so it's so receptive to integrating new styles of music or new styles of musical thought, and it's just this dough that can be created into something new every time you go and want to create something new with it. So that's what I think is the ultimate power of music.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really beautiful, and to hear it in action is even more special. To hear you actually bring something like that to life is so interesting. Does it change your interpretation of playing Western classical music as you're studying the Indian idiom? Does that change some of the ways you might think about Western music?
I wouldn't say it. Well, actually, it makes me wonder. Like we talk about. So there's we talk about chord progressions, and we kind of like delineate like rationality of. It's very rational. So we start from a 1, we go to 4, we go to 5, and but that's not the only way. Maybe you could think of this music. You could think of it in so many different other ways, just like certain tones moving here and there through different voices. Instead of just instead of thinking vertically, you can think more horizontally, because in Indian music you think of it in a more horizontal style in terms of how to bring out the rasa, like I was saying, of a raga. There isn't harmony in Indian classical music, so you see it all horizontally. So you can see Western music in a way as instead of these vertical pillars of harmonies, you can see it in terms of voices moving horizontally. That's how I've started to see Western music
that's wonderful,
because of my study of Indian classical music.
And thank you for that. That's true. I've had friends of mine who are accomplished Juilliard string players, and then they've become really good at playing rock and roll violin, or they go into pop style, and they've got to really learn how to listen to chords. And it slightly changes. They always tell me that changes, like when you do a lot of improvisation, it changes the way you think about the chords. It just it just changes. It actually, they told me, a lot of them told me it made them a better player.
Yeah, because I mean, even back in the day in Western classical music, and people were really versatile. They'd be composers, performers, improvisers. Because of my studies of Indian music, I love improvising. I like to compose my own cadenzas for Western, for concertos. I compose as well. So it's just because of my studies of Indian music, I've started to see that what's kind of become the norm in Western classical music today, just being a performer, just being a composer. It can be good to focus, but I just feel like I'd like to try to be more versatile. That just feels more natural to me. So because of my of Indian music, I've started to see that yes, it's completely doable, and why not?
A funny cross. I don't know if this is relevant, but it comes to mind for me is if you go back time far enough, the first Western polyphony was against a drone, right? And just like the tambura instrument, the drone that we heard on the recording, that low instrument that plays the drone notes. I just love the fact that people got tired of singing those drones. They had them playing either on like a hurdy-gurdy or on an organ. That became the drone because the singers used to just go, oh, they would just hold that for about an hour while the chant happens around it. Well, I was doing a rehearsal with a sitar player, and he had his tambura app, and he just bloop, and there goes the tambura, and I just think that's so interesting.
Yeah, we've become modernized in a way. I mean, ideally, you have the tambura, the tambura. You have it. You have an actual instrumentalist playing with you. But yeah, when right now we don't have that, so we just use an app or a
it made me smile to see like the modernization of everything we do, and how over time we see things change and innovate in different ways. And what you're doing is really, really interesting. How can people find out more about your music? Where can we go to learn more about you and what you're working on?
Yeah, so my website is kind of the first stop. It's just my full name.com, so priyankavenkatesh.com. You can, my Instagram is at priyanka.violin. So my YouTube channel is just my name, pretty much, Priyanka Venkatesh Violin.
So you're easy to find.
Yeah, I'm pretty there. I'm pretty there.
And now I know you don't just play.
You can subscribe to my mailing list too.
Is that on your email, on your website?
It's on my website, yeah.
Make sure you check out this music. It's really wonderful and a fantastic artist. So I know you also play with a piano trio that specializes in many different styles of music, not just Western classical and Indian, but there's also, I think, a big tango influence. Tell us about your piano trio.
Yeah. So it's Trio Scarlet. We do a lot of, so we recently recorded the Piazzolla Four Seasons. So, and we specialize in tango. We want to kind of branch out, and we want to composers to compose with the Indian and Western styles, this kind of synthetic style. We want to play music from that's around the world. I might consider even composing for our trio. But yeah, it's kind of a trio that's based off of composing music that's from different parts of the world.
So when you go to Italy on your Fulbright, when you go to India, on your Fulbright.
Italy.
That'd be nice too, but you're going to India. So where in India are you going to go, and are you going to travel around, and what's going to be your focus of your research?
Yeah, so I'll start in Mumbai, and study more Hindustani music, Hindustani classical music. So yeah, it'll the focus of my time there will be more detailed study of Indian classical music, but also sharing my own research about how we can synthesize Indian and Western music, and so giving performances, giving lecture recitals. I may also go to the south to do more Carnatic music as well, so in Chennai or the Bangalore area. But yeah, it's also just a bit of a large experience that I haven't planned out yet, but I think it'll be fun. So, but I would encourage anyone who has the opportunity to apply for a Fulbright to do so, because it can just be a great cultural experience.
Change your mind. I have a colleague of mine at Seton Hall University who is he's a rabbinical scholar, and he's a professor at Seton Hall, and they call him the Rabbi of the Ganges. He was there for a while, and he talks to me all the time about his experience and how much he learned.
Well, so what does he study?
I think he studied Judaism. I think he went there and he
Wow,
studied world religion and probably was studying a local religion and then brought it back and kind of.
interesting. Wow, that
But I know they
sounds
call him
like
the
a
Rabbi of the Ganges, which I love, and it's kind of interesting. Somewhere I have not been to India yet. It's on my list. I can't wait to. COVID has slowed everything down. I was supposed to be in Vienna and Prague, but India and South, I definitely want to go someday and explore the musical culture.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd love to hear your music too. So yeah, it could be like a collaborative kind of experience where you share your music, you go to concerts.
Well, there's so
Maybe
much
I could
great
put
music
you in
being
touch
made.
with some people.
Well, I hope so. And we'll keep making great music, keep experimenting and exploring, and I can't wait to see what the results of these experiments and the soul searching is going to lead, because it's gorgeous and really so important today.
Thank you. Yeah, like you said, it is soul searching. It's like a kind of you want your music to be a sonic manifestation of your soul. And so that's what it is. And I think your music too, it's a soul searching. It's just that's it needs to come from that kind of root place. Otherwise it doesn't have your music, for me at least, it won't have the same impact. So you gotta be always doing that soul searching.
Well, we wish you the best on your exams and you finishing off your doctorate and continued success. And when you come back, I want to talk again about we'll talk again on the podcast about what you've discovered and talk about your new music.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jason.
All the
It's a
best, Priyanka. Have a
pleasure.
great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on Music Matters with Jason Tramm. Please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on our upcoming guests and topics. We have a show tomorrow at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time with Metropolitan Opera conductor Pierre Vallet, one of the preeminent conductors in the world. We're delighted he can join us, and thank you so much for being here. And remember, keep music alive.